A YouTuber I enjoy, Undertaker Freak 1127, made a video around a week or a week and a half ago talking about the myth of there being a male loneliness epidemic. Now, when I say myth, and when he says myth as well, that doesn't mean that there isn't a loneliness epidemic of any stride that shouldn't be addressed, but rather what is typically sold to young men is a myth. Your loneliness is not your fault, but rather at the fault of the women who don't desire you, and they would never go with you because they'd rather be with the Chad football jock because women's taste in men is incredibly superficial. Never mind the glaring hypocrisy in this line of thinking when it comes to superficiality, because a lot of men who ascribe to this train of thought typically view women as nothing more than living and breathing fleshlights, and they believe women somehow owe them sex and they don't value women beyond that. But yes, do go on about how you're not the superficial one, supposedly. But anyway, his video gave me the idea for this video because yes, I do believe there is a male loneliness epidemic, much like how there is a loneliness epidemic for women as well, and everyone in general. It's a broad, multifaceted issue, but I think at the core, it's patriarchy that perpetuates it. In the case of men, it's instilled into us from a young age that we always need to be stoic, always be in control of our emotions, power through all of our problems, and that leaves no room for vulnerability and being honest to others about who you really are and how you feel. You're essentially wearing a hyper-aggressive mask 24/7, suppressing who you really are to fit a certain mold society believes you should live up to, but that mold may not be exactly reflective of who you really are, and so you feel inadequate in the sense that you're not a real man, quote-unquote. And this ties back to loneliness and lack of compatibility, because it's not 1952 anymore. Women are far more financially independent than they were just up until recent history. They are capable of living independent from a man should they choose to. And so women now aren't just looking for a man to bring a check home and to put food on the table and to make babies with. No, they want someone who they are actually compatible with. So yes, you can say women are more picky now than they have historically been. And to that I say, no duh. Women aren't passed like cattle anymore to a man they may or may not actually want to marry but are forced to regardless. Or they don't just merely have the facade of independence anymore where, yeah, they don't technically have to get married, but they're still more or less forced into marriage due to very limited career opportunities. And since now it is very common for a woman to be able to live a perfectly independent life without needing a man to lean on, this also creates a sense of inadequacy among a lot of men. Because now they feel they don't have a role to fulfill, because since pretty much the dawn of human civilization, it was always a man that was the head of the family, while the woman tends to the home and has his children. And now that we don't have such rigid gender norms that toxically masculine traits were made to cater to, a lot of men just don't know how to approach being in a relationship with a woman, and unfortunately a lot of manosphere influencers and podcast bros take advantage of this, and tell mostly young men that it isn't the toxic traits they possess that are the problem, but rather external groups like women who are actually the problem. Because introspection is a lot of work, and frankly a lot of people are too lazy to address and change toxic traits they have within themselves, and so they go with the much easier non-solution, blaming other people for their own faults and failings. And unfortunately, capitalizing on people's lack of introspection is incredibly lucrative, because most people who don't want to change toxic traits they may have want a talking head to validate said toxic traits and tell them that they don't need to change and that it's other people's fault that they're lonely. But the truth is, loneliness is universal. Anyone ever get those I have no friends videos recommended to them by YouTube? Because I do sometimes, and at least in my experience, I notice that probably 9 times out of 10, when I do get one of these videos showing up in my feed, it's usually a woman lamenting about being lonely. And I go into the comments of some of these videos, and some of the comments are stupid shit like, how could someone who looks like you possibly be lonely? Because the person in the video may be what is considered quote-unquote conventionally attractive. And I think this type of attitude plays into how it is entirely possible for women to be lonely as well. And this also ties back to what I was talking about earlier about how men can be just as superficial as they claim women to be. Society tends to tie a woman's woman's self-worth into how attractive she may be and give her a set of beauty standards she has to live up to. It also doesn't help that social media is inundated with women who look more like Barbie dolls than they do actual human beings. But those are the kinds of women who tend to get the most attention on social media and eyes gawking at them. And so a lot of women who are still developing their sense of identity think that these kinds of women they see on social media are what they should strive to emulate, even though those kinds of women maybe make up like a small fraction of the population of women in this world. And these set of toxic beauty standards only encourages a form of interaction that has very little to do with a person's actual character, and has much more to do with how pretty their face may be and how nice their body may be. There is no real interpersonal interaction, and you're just going awooga to someone you find pretty. Now, I'm not trying to say finding someone attractive is inherently the problem. I've befriended some people who I personally find attractive, but that's not the driving force into why I befriended them in the first place. I found them to be fun and interesting people to talk to, whose presence I enjoy. But we have this toxic culture where a woman is always pressured to look her best, always pressured to be a source of eye candy for a man. And we whittle her down to just her looks and no characteristics beyond that. Yes, women on average get more attention than men do, but, and this is a point UTF also made in his video, how much of that attention is actually wanted? Women disproportionately get catcalled, receive unsolicited remarks regarding their looks, and overall receive attention from men who only have one goal in mind: to get into bed with the woman they're talking to. And that is all they value about that woman, and many other women I'm sure that they find attractive. Attention can be isolating when it is not attention that you desire, and when said attention makes you feel like you are only valued for one superficial aspect about yourself. And I feel social media definitely helps perpetuate this phenomenon. Well, one, the manosphere bullshit, like I already talked about, that perpetuates misogyny and patriarchy. But also, and I've talked about this point before, the way social media is structured, it encourages these types of shallow and superficial interactions. We only share the best bits about ourselves and the most flattering photos of ourselves so we can get the easy compliments in the replies. But what our social media replies usually lack is depth and real interpersonal connection. And that type of short bite interaction is the main source of communication for so many young people today, especially post-pandemic. Your sense of identity is formed during your adolescent years, and for many young people, a portion of their adolescent years was spent in social isolation, and a crucial part of forming your sense of identity is interacting with other people on a face-to-face level, but instead for a chunk of a crucial portion of their lives, they had to interact with the outside world through a phone screen or a computer monitor. And so when it comes to interacting with the outside world, they have a lot of trouble. This is not a male loneliness issue or a female loneliness issue. This is a universal issue, especially for younger people. And it also doesn't help that a lot of people are facing economic turmoil. Prices for goods go up, their bills go up, meanwhile their wages stay the same. The job market is incredibly competitive, and a lot of people have trouble finding jobs, and going out and socializing with other people is seen as this luxurious pastime you need money for. With the way capitalism is structured, recreational human interaction is de-incentivized in favor of having to earn the small pockets of enjoyment in your life instead. So there is a lot of misconceptions surrounding the loneliness epidemic and who experiences it, both out of malicious intent to keep people misinformed and divided so shitheads can keep profiting off of hatred and misogyny, and also out of genuine ignorance, usually from people who have misplaced anger in other groups of people who really have nothing to do with their loneliness. But really, everyone is lonely. This should not be a dividing issue in the slightest. I'm lonely too. I have friends in real life, but it's not like I see them all that often. I don't go out much. I have horrible social anxiety. So I'm not speaking from any ivory tower. I am very much in your camp. But I understand that my loneliness is caused by issues that I possess, which is probably the case for you as well if you're experiencing loneliness. And to anyone who is the type to turn to manosphere influencers and podcast bros, think to yourself, is the shit they're spewing really that effective? You're likely still lonely, so why not address the issues and possibly toxic traits you possess, and improve upon those traits instead of remaining bitter and hateful, which is probably why you're lonely in the first place. At least if you're the type of person I'm talking about at the end here. Anyway, that's all I have to say. Bye-bye.